I'm Cornelius Tulloch, Global Artistic Director here at AIRIE. Here in conversation with Jean Shin, our 2026 January Fellow, who's bringing such an exciting practice to the Everglades. And really, I'm just curious to learn more, to have an artist like you who's looking at consumption materials. What is it like when looking at the Everglades as a space to draw inspiration for materials or these kind of contrasts between both natural and man-made objects and things? How has that process been as you've been evaluating this environment?
Mm. Well, I've been at the Everglades and just seeing such an incredible biodiversity, right, of plants and species I've never encountered before. So for me, it's really examining like a palmetto. I've never seen one of those and seen so much thriving in the
Mhm.
pine lands, and then learning the story that after fires, that are regularly managed, that they're first to recover and come
Mhm.
back and they're not destroyed, that they're fire resilient. And I think those stories make impact. And so that is something that holds dear to me, like
Mhm.
as a form, as a species, as a
Mhm.
community that are first to recover, right?
Yeah.
Because their roots didn't get damaged.
Yeah.
And it's just this surface, right?
Mm.
So those kinds of things impact me in a way that I want to take to my studio practice. They're also incredibly beautiful, and the geometry and the
Mhm.
folds and so
Yes.
on.
Yes.
So things like that. And then other stories that I'm encountering when I'm having those gator encounters, they're kind of just
Very much so.
at first you were just like, oh my gosh, they're immense creatures, like prehistoric. Like, how does it still survive today?
Yeah.
And they have evolved and adopted and adopted and adopted. So in some way, of course, they could have been at the endangered
Mhm.
level too, but they are in full recovery here, million plus
Yeah.
population and growing. So in stewardship, right, this ancient creature,
Mhm. Mhm.
is still with us,
Yeah.
right? And their adaptive skill set. I mean, that is something to learn from,
Mhm.
right? So I feel like nature's teaching us how to
Mhm.
be with all the changes. And we have not experienced as much as anything that an alligator has seen, right?
Mm.
And when I see the first encounter, it seems daunting and maybe harmful, but in fact, it's just coexisting with us. And
Yeah.
by the time, I've seen a dozen plus, they're just like cats sunning, bathing, so I've gotten sort of used to witnessing them and enjoying them for who they are,
Yeah.
having just feasted, ate, now just
Yeah.
chilling, in the ecosystem. But the mangroves are another environment, the mangrove forest, how they live in salt water and brackish water and
Mhm.
do so
Mhm.
much
Mhm.
of the first defense in hurricanes.
Yeah.
And so while we're dreaming up how do we survive the climate change, here's nature already providing the answers,
Yeah.
and yet we're destroying them, right?
Yeah.
And they are the first to come to our defense
Yeah.
with a storm.
And I love seeing that you're kind of looking at these things that are around us here, especially it can be taken for granted in our natural environment, but they have these unique and beautiful systems, these ecosystems, these kind of natural systems that protect
Yes.
and rejuvenate the land in these different ways. And knowing someone like you is with your practice that is thinking about all these kind of deep conceptual kind of poetic things, but also being very tangible in kind of execution as an artist
Mhm,
with
mhm,
involving the community in your process. What has that
mhm,
been like?
mhm.
And I know that you have some kind of programming going on in the park. Could
Mm.
you speak a little bit more about why it's important for you to engage in that way with your practice?
Yes, because I don't have the time during the residency to execute a large term project. The public engagement for me was like, well, I don't want it to be just a lecture, but that
Mm-hmm.
will inspire people because I have a practice in which I've done a lot of plastic pollution crisis,
Okay.
communities that are really under threat because of plastic pollution. And that is the single-use plastics and
Mm.
water bottles. And I particularly love this green bottle, the Mountain Dew bottle, which is high fructose corn syrup and mass produced,
Mm.
not for our health or consumption, but really to be polluted in our
Yeah.
environment
Yeah.
and having such bad health results, but also in the ecosystem, right? So I've followed this thread where plastics is the most invasive and detrimental to both our health and our
Mhm.
ecology. And we just take a sip, and throw it out. and don't think twice. Even when we try to recycle consciously, very few, less than 10% gets recycled.
Wow.
So the rest of it goes into our waste stream, into our waters, and then right into our marine habitat. Just following one single bottle to that, where did it start? Why did someone invent it? Who's responsible for this? And then the consumer being overwhelmed, but also being delighted by the convenience, but not understanding the true cost of this convenience of plastics, the single use, and how it has a detrimental effect in ecosystems you won't think are related to you having used a single straw or a water bottle, and then we're in fact, dealing with our own health with plastics as microplastics, right? So the fish that you eat, who's consume that same straw, is now in us. So now we're made out of plastics. So the full cycle has come back. So we need to kind of break that cycle and really respect the ecosystem, and which is like co-inhabitant and codependent. And we kind of understand like whatever we see in the water landscape is something that actually is us and is part of our lived experience, So I have loved working with communities who are struggling, around the infrastructure of recycling or not to consume this, because they don't have water structures, but also in communities that abundance, right? You just, everything's at your convenience, and so you just discard stuff because you're no longer in need of it. But that just kind of evaluating the cost of those habitual convenience has led me to make these large scale installations that really monumentalize what we often, don't see because it is discarded, recycled, or moved to different communities. So I've done projects in Kenya where almost literally the Western waste falls on their shoreline and being part of their river cleanups and really creating a movement around trying to combat and stop single-use plastics, right? And so I wanted this community here to also have that hands-on experience because we go from inspiration to impact. And through the lived experience of participating in a cleanup, you start to imagine like, oh my God, I'm picking up everyone else's trash, right? And this is what the turtles and fish are doing all the time, right? Being caught up in this mess that had nothing to do with them, right? So if you participate in that mindset for a day, cleaning up, you're so humbled and would never be throwing away this afterwards because you can't get rid of that image in your mind, like why this beautiful beach is littered with, flip-flops and water bottles and random little trinkets and, the dollar store somethings. And, it's like you had fun for a little party and now it's literally endangering endangered species, So I think those are the things that I want people to walk away from, but also enjoy a beautiful boat trip, this remote island. How do you want to protect it? But how do we want to coexist with all these issues confronted?
And I love that you talk so much about this kind of co-inhabitants, coexistence, because many people forget that, especially in Miami as so adjacent to the Everglades, part of the Everglades, and people can forget that being in urban spaces, that this impacts our water here. This impacts our livelihood. And I think especially what excites AIRIE to have an artist like you in residence, especially for the 25th anniversary, is someone whose practice goes beyond dialogue to actual impact, to actual action, and seeing the way that you want to engage with community and bring them. Really, I think that helps build up knowledge for a community of how to engage with certain environments, certain things that they may be overlooking. But I think as well adds to this legacy of artists who have come to interpret our natural landscapes. And I always say that artists have a beautiful skill of storytelling that really allows people to view something from a different perspective than they normally would. But I think allows them to engage with these kind of more complex social issues and topics and think about the environment in this particular way. But I also want to know more for you, I guess, kind of how does it feel, or how do you imagine your practice as well adding to this legacy of artists in the environment? And adding to the kind of storytelling of these landscapes.
Right. Well, to be continued. I mean, that's just starting here, taking in and soaking and listening. It's been a rich conversation and time of learning for me, following my curiosities and seeing where it leads. But I do think that all these ecosystems are impacted, you know, so there's 9 various ecosystems in the Everglades, and that is interconnected with all the ecosystems elsewhere. So I love to see the kind of relationships that we have with each other, you know, and this community is really special because it is governed by the National Park Service, you know, and so that's a very special relationship and collaboration. And whatever sites I'm working with, I'm really talking about who lives there, who's the community, who stewards this land. And so we have a particular dynamics with the national parks is like it's federal, that comes and changes all the time what that means in our lives, right? The people are the labor in helping to preserve, right? But I think that notion of conservation and preservation like are also contested. How do we do that well? And it's evolved and changed, you know? So I'm very curious about those systems. You know, this is really like, it is our nature, right? It is our lives that are impacted, but the systems that are in place and who gets to protect it, who gets to have access to it, you know? So it's really rare for our AIRIE interface where we get to be here with the rangers, treated like one of those seasonal volunteers, very temporary, but very much in the same ethos. But our work, of course, is very different than the park rangers. And as you mentioned, I feel like artists are these catalysts. We don't fit in any one box, you know? And then we get to kind of bring together people that are interested, but maybe have never experienced art in this way. And we get to change people's minds about what art is, how it can function, as well as change and transform people's imagination about their own lived experience and the world around them. To me, that is such a privilege to be in spaces like Everglades and interact with a community that, you know, observes this landscape all the time in relationship with visitors who are coming for the first time, just like me, a bit nervous, having to trust, you know, nature, and then build confidence after witnessing and observing over time. I'm eyeing those gators, the gators are eyeing me. We're trying to establish whether we're threats to each other or not, you know, and I'm doing it at an individual level, but as a collective, you know, and then like systematically over generations, we have been threats to those species, and, you know, and they should be aggressive back. They should just fight back, right? Because the alligator skins and, you know, it just, we have such history of behaving so poorly and wanting just to consume and take and not give back, you know? Or even if you're going to borrow something, then somewhere else give more. And so the sense of reciprocation hasn't been here as much. So I'm very curious where my ideas will land, but it's been really, really an interesting challenge for me to think about what does the federal government and their role in stewarding our landscapes as much as what is our artist's role, what's our human role to coexist and be sharing this interspatial love in this place. You know?
No, and I love that. And it's been a pleasure to see your practice come to this space, to have artists and minds that are thinking in the way engage with this environment. And I'm also excited to see kind of where your work develops beyond this point. I think it's always amazing to see artists coming to this space, as you said, with so much curiosity. I hope that everyone can come with that same level of curiosity to this environment. So really, thank you so much. And just so appreciative to hear this and can't wait to see all that comes from it.
Thank you. And I really want to say also that I'm in conversation with so many amazing artists. And so AIRIE and its celebration of the 25th anniversary, it's a pivotal time, right? And to imagine the generations of artists, including yourself, who've gone and been impacted, been part of this community. So many of my dear artist friends who share the ethos, you know, in doing this work and doing it as humbly and with their artistic vision, you know, as expansively as well. So it's been wonderful to be in that kind of overlapped community here.
Happy to have you in the AIRIE family.